interact with you folks and to share some new things we're doing and to remind you of some of the things that we should all be doing. And Chapman Mayo, the president of Agro, is going to do the introductions here and welcome. And so he's going to come forward now and thank him for his leadership with Agro and all he does for us.
Thank you, Larry. I'll second Larry's good morning and welcome to today's events. First of all, before I get started, I would like to thank Dale Christensen and Larry, because these guys are the guys that make this event happen, and the Small Fruit Seminar, which will happen on Saturday. They've been the driving force behind pulling these things together, and they've been really, I think, well-attended events, and growers have really gotten a lot out of these events. So my appreciation to both of them for, as well as Eric, who's the technological whiz that makes it all pull together as well too. So thank you to them. I just wanted to say, for those, I see a lot of familiar faces, and that's great. There's some new faces as well too. But for those of you who are not familiar with Agro at this point in time, Agro is actually, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. So it's a real milestone for us. We're quite proud of that. And Agro as a company was really the driving force behind it. Is my in-laws are the ones that were sort of the creative and knit guts behind pulling this thing together in cooperation with Larry Schaefer and his family 40 years ago. So there was a lot of collaboration that happened at that point in time, and Agro was formed. But as a company, we really have always sort of early on been a company that has striven to improve quality in terms of produce. That's been one of the driving missions, and so it's kind of interesting to fast forward 40 years to see today, and what's really happening in not just the apple market, but in all industries of fruit growing and vegetable growing. The quality factors and what is important to marketing a good quality product has really changed, I think. And the fact that nutrition is becoming a real integral part of improving quality, as well as overlapping on crop protection, that sort of synergies. Agro is really kind of in a neat place from my perspective at this point in time in this industry. And so the types of these events today to help inform you all of what we're doing from a research standpoint in the trials, and the demos, all of these sorts of things that help to improve our ability to help you guys improve your crop is really quite fun and interesting. So today's event is have we done these? We haven't done this as many as the small fruit.
Right. We started with small fruit. Apples were always included in that, but we got such a good group of people. We've done about 5, I think, small fruit seminars.
And I think the apples are, as you all know who grow apples, it's a very fun and challenging crop to grow, but it really, after a while, we decided it really did need its own full day to focus on as well too. So that's where this event comes in. And I know you're used to seeing, those of you who have attended these events in the past, are used to seeing Larry and Dell. But today we're going to mix it up a bit and have a couple of other speakers. We have Ken Dart, who is our National Technical and Marketing Manager. And Ken's grew up, basically, he was sort of born and bred in the tree fruit industry in the Northwest, has worked in all facets of the tree fruit industry, from the growing to the processing, distribution, quality control, from the ag chem side, obviously now from the fertility side. He's a horticulture major from Washington's WSU. Really, I think you'll really enjoy his presentation in terms of how nutrition plays a really critical role in fruit quality. The other person, new face that you're probably going to see today, is Rick DeYoung, who's back there. Rick is new to our, we need to welcome him. He came south of the border. Rick is new to Agro as of last summer. Rick comes from the Okanagan Valley area of British Columbia. They've got a nice tree fruit and vineyard market up there as well too. And Rick has been in that industry for quite a long time and has worked with our products in that area as well too. So both of these guys are going to impart some knowledge that we think is important in terms of improving fruit quality and good orchard practices, and I think you'll find that information valuable. And then we'll obviously rely on our mainstay, Del Christensen, to impart wisdom on all of us. He's sort of our guru in the local area, so it'll be always good to hear from him. So I think we've got a really good event today, and I think you'll really appreciate the information that we share. So thank you again. Welcome. Appreciate you all making the time to come. We do appreciate it.
Well, Del being a former educator, and I had some teaching experience, he said one way to get the attention of the students when you start something is to give a quiz. And I said, oh, Del, we're not going to give a quiz, are we? So, well, we'll kind of tone it down and call it a survey. So we're going to pass out this survey, and we want you to objectively as you can score this. You'll see what it is. So would you look at this survey for a few minutes? And we're asking you to score it, one being your greatest concern. You might have 1 or 2 1s and a lot of 2s or 2.5s and maybe some 5s. And what we're trying to do here is really, we realize that you as growers, there are so many areas and avenues that you must manage. It's just not nutrition. It's just not good soil fertility. It's just not marketing. It's all of these things that you as growers face. And so by being aware of that and helping you address that, we hope today to encourage you and give you some input that will further help you address that. So weather, of course. Maybe this past year was, we had a lot of wet. We had people that had hail. Growing issues. And there's a lot of different growing issues that you might see as a big concern and maybe not. And then some of the issues on quality. The bitter pit, some russeting, cracking. I mean, under the other issue, write in what you're concerned about. This government regulation. We were over at the Great Lakes Fruit and Vegetable Show there, and I was talking to Mike, and Mike Tokarski comes out and says, well, now I know the definition of water, that they spent the whole one session talking about what is water. And how the grower would be aware of that. So there are some huge, and it's getting more and more of these government regulations. So anybody want to offer just a couple of things? We're not going to collect these, but we would like, what we're trying to do is, if you came to this seminar thinking everything is rosy and I don't have any problems, what we're trying to do is make you aware that there are a lot of issues that you must address and be aware of. And you do know that, I'm sure. It just sometimes you don't put them all down on paper and think about them. But what we're trying to do is get you to focus in today on areas that we will definitely help you address in terms of nutrition and quality. And so what would be the number one issue that you faced this past year in all of these categories? And was it a quality concern? Was that one that keeps coming up?
Are you asking?
I'm asking, yes.
Our Sweet Tango, we had quite a bit of russeting.
Sweet Tango had quite a bit of russeting, okay? And a lot of wet weather?
No, it was kind of a nice year.
Nice year, but you still had russeting. Okay, well, Ken is going to address some of those issues, so definitely that will be one to make it a priority as to where does that rushing come.
Well, I don't know about everybody else, but this year I had trouble with quality pack out in Honeycrisp.
Quality pack out.
Yeah, it was,
Bitter pit or internal browning or?
you know, it was like a lot of things and some niggly little things that I haven't seen before.
Really?
But the pack out was disappointing.
Disappointing. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
Just to add, I mean, the storage quality on the Honeycrisp didn't seem to be there.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree.
I think hail.
Hail.
Can't do much about hail, but what's my biggest concern?
What, you know, is there some people that are doing hail netting now? Is that coming?
Yeah.
You're doing hail netting? You are. For how many acres?
Just a couple. It's over our Sweet Tango, and all of our new plantings of Honeycrisp, we're gonna get hail on it.
Hail netting. Well, we'll be interested in hearing reports back on that.
Yeah, we will.
Tom,
Spring frost,
spring frost.
blossom and freezing.
I thought we missed that this year.
Well, we did.
You didn't.
We came out okay, but
Okay. So frost is growing apples in Minnesota. You know, given this what's happening right now, we had a 73-day temperature. That soil is warming up. Those buds are going to start swelling. That's definitely going to be an issue. That's definitely going to be an issue that you're going to face. Anybody else going to? Yeah.
The winter 2015 lack of snow and compromised the root systems, the feeder root systems on the trees and made them real weak coming into the spring.
So you had winter damage
In the root system.
in the root. Okay.
cracking on my Sweet Tango.
Cracking. So there's discussion about Sweet Tango that genetically it's starting to deteriorate and decline. Has anybody picked up on that or heard about that? That Sweet Tango, I'm not Sweet Tango, I'm sorry, Honeycrisp. That genetically, over time, the reproduction, the quality of the Sweet Tango has gradually slipped.
Or Honeycrisp.
For Honeycrisp.
Which one?
Honeycrisp.
Okay, you said Sweet Tango again.
I know, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I mean Sweet Tango. I mean Honeycrisp. Honeycrisp. That was the conversation at the Great Lakes Fruit and Vegetable Show. The growers were raising that question: is the Honeycrisp genetically, is it becoming weaker? Is it not doing what it had in the past? It's declining. Is that the?
Are they saying on the old trees? Is it because the old trees?
No, the newer plantings just doesn't seem to have that quality that the old trees had.
Well, that's interesting because I've sort of figured out that the trees just aren't as long-lasting and vigorous as other varieties.
Okay.
I sort of call it the Honeycrisp decline. The trees, after they get to a certain age, start to die and then die quickly. So do you think that's related to the quality of the fruit, just the age of the trees, like he was suggesting?
I'm raising that as a question to you. Have you seen that? Do you have an old Honeycrisp block and maybe some newer plantings, and where do you see the problem? How are the newer plantings doing? That will be part of the discussion, and Ken will address.
What age of tree are you referring to? How old are you talking about?
Well, I have some original ones back from '91
Okay.
on standard,
So
which
you're talking 17, 18, 20-year-old type trees.
yeah,
Okay.
plus.
And those had some of the quality issues this past.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about relating quality issues to the age of the trees, because I know the trees are suffering on a serious
Okay.
decline after 15 to 18 years.
All right.
It
No.
might be that that's a variety that has to be replaced after X number of
Well, I
years.
think that's the way the thinking is going now, at least my thinking is.
Yeah. Anybody else have something that they want to raise to us? What we're trying to do is stir the pot. Get everybody thinking about what we need to address today in our seminar, in terms of quality, in terms of good healthy trees, and so.
I wonder if it's just the sky on Honeycrisp or if it's the rootstock that it's growing on.
And maybe Ken can speak to that. We're going to give him a chance to address.
Let 'em talk.
Okay. So your question is?
Well, no, I'm just adding to it because I've also seen the same thing on M7 rootstock, that the Honeycrisp, my older Honeycrisp, are starting to die off. My younger ones are able to make it through some of the tougher winters and through some of the tougher issues.
Okay. And quality issues on the old trees and the younger trees, or both places on the Honeycrisp?
No, quality seems, I guess I haven't noticed as much of the quality fruit thing, other than, the storage thing was real bad last year.
Okay.
Not near what it had been in the past.
All right.
We saw an odd, one of our blocks, older trees, had internal browning that we couldn't pin down as to what it was. It wasn't bitter pit, and we actually talked to the people in Madison about it, and they came back and said that it was some kind of heat-related stress that happened to the actual fruit. But we didn't see it at any of our other orchards, and we have 4 different orchards. It was just in one block.
In Honeycrisp?
Honeycrisp, yes.
Okay.
Senescence?
Pardon?
Isn't it called senescence? I thought I heard that.
They didn't, I didn't hear that. They didn't suggest that.
And so what did they call it?
Well, they said it was internal browning. That's
Internal
as far as
browning.
they went with it. But it was the oddest thing. You couldn't see it from the outside of the fruit. You had to cut into it, so if you were packing it, it would pass.
It would.
And then you cut into it, and it had these veins going into it to a browning, rotting core.
Really?
Yeah. So we ended up just leaving everything out.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. Right. We just left it out in the field.
Well, I'm going to ask Dell. He's going to come up now and carry on a little bit as to some of the data and research and experience that many of you growers provided us. We've been doing tissue test, fruitlet testing, as well as sap testing, and so we're going to share just a little bit of that. So, Dell, come on ahead. I think I've stirred the pot enough.
All right, good morning. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to stir the pot any further or throw it out or what. Go ahead. Anyway, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this section this morning. We want to give as much time as possible to our guest speaker who have come in and have a lot more years of experience and can continue the dialogue that I think is excellent, where we can look at the problems and really zero in on what it is that we're trying to accomplish and try to understand better how to control some of these issues. We're always looking for quality. Quality is number one. One of the things that we don't have a really good sort of a descriptor for is the quality. Are we talking about appearance, color, flavor, sugar levels, the bricks, all kinds of different possibilities there. So I'm just going to whiz through. We've done this very similar presentation before, and I'm doing it probably more for the new growers, or the new attendees, I should say, to the seminar. We also have this on DVD, so if we go through too fast, you want to revisit it again, talk to Eric afterwards or sometime today, and we'll make sure that we get a copy of this very similar presentation. But there are a number of conditions, contributing factors leading to the disorder. And Ken will talk about a number of these here as we go along. But we have storage conditions, the nutritional balance. The storage conditions are, Honeycrisp is a little tricky on how do we prepare it for storage. The nutritional balance is, of course, a key area. Aggressive pruning affects all of those kind of factors, the nutritional balance and how the tree is growing. Pollination and seed number is actually another nutritional component, as well as the pollination part. We saw a presenter from university who was sort of a pollinator expert, and he had been to China, and he showed a picture of there they had gotten rid of the bees, killed all the honeybees, so they have to go up with ladders and actually pollinate by hand a number of the apple trees. So you think about labor You want to add that to your activity in the spring. Crop load, all of these things you've all known about, but putting them all together maybe puts a little different light on it. Fruit size, light penetration, age of the planting we just heard about. What's been the soil moisture, the erraticness when you're out where you have irrigation and dry land, why it can be relatively, I say relatively simple, but when you are living in Minnesota, things can change, or Wisconsin or wherever. Weather regime, that we'll see as far as the temperature and all of that. Harvest timing, you know, the urge to pick early, to get it into the market early, can affect, of course, what that quality fruit is like. So we have some nutritional causes. We're kind of repeating ourselves. Fruit with low calcium, high potassium, and high magnesium have a higher incidence of the bitter pit and the cork spot and senescent breakdown. And, you know, I'd be interested to really figure out what all of those, which one of those or how many of those were involved. Low temperature breakdown and decay. And I expect Ken will be talking about either all of these or many of them. Low phosphorus have a higher incidence of senescent breakdown at low temperature and low temperature breakdown. So we have combinations. None of these issues are experienced in isolation. There's always probably many contributing factors to each one of these. And the better we are able to manage each element, the better off we are going to be in terms of the overall quality. Just a quick review, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about this afternoon, but this chart really describes how do the nutrients move in the plant. And many of them, like phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, and nitrogen, move up the plant as the tree or plant needs them. And so if the plant is running short on nitrogen or magnesium or potassium, it'll rob from the old leaves to the new leaves. So we're doing a sap testing program where we sample both the old leaves and the new leaves in order to get an idea of how is that tree being fed. How are we seeing the nutrients that are necessary? Some of these are very stable or lesser mobile, let's say, medium immobile nutrients. Sulfur, iron, manganese, zinc, copper, and molybdenum. They will move somewhat and slowly, but they aren't as quick a movers as the four main ones, we could say the macronutrients. Then we get up to an issue with our bitter pit and a lot of the apple quality issues, which is calcium and boron. And those do not move. Once they are in the plant, in the leaf, they pretty much stay there. I mean, there's maybe a slight amount, and that's where you see the deficiency. If you're looking at a plant in deficiency, if it's showing up in the very tip of the plant, you will consider that to be a calcium and boron as an indication. When you see the newer growth, evidence of some deficiency, iron, could be copper, those kinds of things are further up the plant, but not up at the tip like the calcium and boron. So that's a really quick, we could spend an hour and discuss all of this, but just to kind of give you that feel. Some of you have all heard this before, but for the new ones, we're just going to touch on that. And so there are a number of factors that determine that mineral level, the pH of the soil and balance, fertilizer release, organic versus mineral. All of these things affect how that plant sees the soil, sees the nutrient supply, and the movement of applied versus plant available. Are we actually getting active or effective use of the nutrients that are being put on? Or does it take a while for them to break down? Like, for example, sulfur. If we put on elemental sulfur, it's going to take some time before the biology works to make that really available. So we often use a sulfate form for that. And so the soil structure, and soil structure can be affected by the chemistry as well as biology, and of course what the mineral levels are. If you've got high magnesium soil, you're likely to have a tighter situation, and if you work it wet, it's going to give you some headaches. Okay, what determines the mineral uptake in plants? So we want good, strong roots. What kind of biology do we have in the soil? Good soil moisture level. A lot of the nutrients, if we don't have moisture coming in through the root tips, we don't get good calcium and boron uptake. They come in together, they work together. So many different conditions, soil, cold soil. The discussion about, I didn't hear the idea about when is the bud break going to happen this spring? And I know there's some questions about that in the audience. And the research talks about the soil temperature probably is a bigger indicator of that bud break process than the air temperature. And so when we have late springs with, a lot of snow in the spring, it may not break as quickly, and I hope we'll have a discussion about that, and maybe the experts can enlighten us on that as well. Climate, temperature, and light and moisture. So all of these things are just sort of a cataloging of that. And we started doing fruit analysis back around 2009, I believe, was when we first did in our area, and I know Ken's been involved with that for many years. And he developed they developed the chart as far as how to determine what the quality of the fruit is relative to potential storage conditions or potential for storage of the apple. And I took two from two different blocks. They were stored for over a year in my refrigerator. And this one obviously has some issues, but these were in the same area and they came through very well. So then when we looked at the chart, the speedometers, to see which are the components that determine, we saw that the better quality fruit had a better speedometer rating for the calcium, magnesium plus potassium over calcium is what we use as one of the indicators. But Ken is going to talk about a whole range of other issues that relate to why does the Honeycrisp give us the fits that it does. So again, this is really quick, and this one is just an example of a report that showed up at about 42.43 in that ratio, and you can see by the speedometer we're in the red zone. That apple is not likely going to store very well. And you can see then what are the contributing factors, and that's kind of how we go. What's the calcium level? What is the nitrogen level and the potassium? This, potassium and calcium are always competing with one another for uptake. Potassium goes into the tree very quickly and easily. Calcium, not so good. Okay, this was a better test. So anyway, again, I can say I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I want to give Ken as much time as he needs. We go by the ratios. They say if you can't manage what you don't measure, and this is a good example of that. If we don't really know what's happening, the effect might come, but we don't really know what all the contributing elements were to that end product. And like nitrogen and calcium ratio are also very important. So it's not just a one element picture. Nitrogen to phosphorus. We need phosphorus. And it's a matter of what the right time is. I showed you the tree and how the nutrients move. When is the proper time for that particular nutrient, or when is the most important time for that particular nutrient to be available to that growing plant? And this is on your handout. You can read that. And again, hopefully it'll pique your interest as far as what that process is if you haven't heard this before. Here we have a classical bitter pit situation. And that's a tough picture to look at when you're trying to sell good Honeycrisp. But we can track it back then to certain management factors and to the conditions we described earlier. There's some really interesting differences even within a tree. And we made a chart then of what some of the reports looked at, and we see that this is sort of a contradiction almost, because the potassium levels on the good fruit were higher than on the bad fruit. And we're thinking that's contrary to what we would expect. But then we look at the ratios, and we see that it is the good fruit has the lower ratio, the bad fruit has the higher ratio. And the calcium, nitrogen to calcium ratio is the same, or the bad fruit showed up to have higher levels. So it isn't so much the individual nutrients and what their level is, it's the ratios. How are they in relation to the other elements that we're looking at? And this just shows it's nutritional requirements of apples throughout the year. just shows that it changes for different elements through the year. Like magnesium and phosphorus looks to be pretty stable, but it's really important at that early stage in order to have the good quality of the apple. I don't know whether they looked at this relative to apple quality or not. It's kind of hard to get at the research that really goes in and zeroes in on this, but it does show that things do change through the year. So it's important with regard to when you do a plant analysis, when you do a test, when do you do it, and what is the standard for that time of the year? So if, like some places, the report comes back that's the same all the year long, according to the standard, but it doesn't really work that way in the real world, and so we got to know what that time of the year should look like. And I like to use look at a range of the nutrients. So I kind of know whether I'm right on the edge or are we in the middle. And again, a lot of our tests for leaf analysis show a single level. And that doesn't really give us the picture that we want and need in order to really manage that problem. But this is an interesting chart in terms of all of the plant samples. I think this was Spectrum Analytics, I forget the source, but it's a major testing laboratory, and they determined what percentage of the samples that they get in were short on these nutrients. Interestingly, 36% were short on potassium. And we'd say potassium is our problem. No, it isn't the problem. We got to have it, and we need it in the right amount. And in many cases, people are not putting enough on. Calcium, of course, 51% was below, was more than 33% below normal of all the samples that they got in. The magnesium, no, not magnesium, copper, 57% of the samples were short on copper. We're looking at fire blight, as well as some other issues with regard to copper. And the zinc, 40% of the samples were deficient or were 33% below normal. Now, recognizing that below normal basically generally means of the samples that they get in, they identify a normal or an average, whatever that means. So we're not 100% sure whether we're actually deficient or not, but we know that we're on the low edge, if nothing else. Another one, sort of a crop response to the micronutrients. And we see that apples are high to boron, copper, manganese, and zinc. High response to those nutrients. So when we're looking at our analysis, we'll want to make sure that those are in the right picture, and we'll probably get a pretty good return to our buck as far as application is concerned. Again, it's a timing. When we look at our fall condition of the trees going into the winter, do they have the right nutrient balance? We try to do a fall testing on the nutrition to see what is the level in that tree going into winter. And because it's the spur, that little spur that's coming out, those are the leaves, the spur leaves are what's feeding that growing point and the tiny fruit for quite a while. And then we see the borse leaves, which is the extension of leaves coming out of that spur. They take over the role. But the spur leaves, if they don't have the nutrition from the fall before, they aren't going to be able to give that initial growing fruit the nutrients that it needs. And then we move on, and here you see a kind of an example of these are the developing fruit, and we have some borse leaves and the spur leaves that are right on the spur itself. And then we get to the next one, which is the entire canopy. And it's quite a while into the year before the canopy is really feeding that growing and developing fruit. And so you really want to make sure that you have the nutrients there from the get-go, because once that window is passed, you can't go back. You can't add on and recover what you've lost in not having the nutrients there in the first place. So we address the balance by looking at the nutrient options. Soil applied, it really starts with the soil. We need to have a good soil condition to begin with. We do a lot of foliar feeding, of course. That's a big issue with us. But we want to make sure that the soil is in the right balance and that the nutrients are there, because when you can combine a good soil condition, including biology, mineral nutrition, and the other management factors, that we will have a much better result from any foliar that we're putting on. So you can't really get the best results by putting a foliar nutrient on in a bad soil condition, is basically the bottom line. And then we have cultural practices, soil biology and organic matter. I'd say soil biology maybe is a key, because the organic matter is what it is, basically. We can build it somewhat, but I'm more interested in keeping that biology going. Proper irrigation, if you have that, and I've reviewed the soil analysis, I think, efficiently. Doing a plant analysis, we see that the copper and zinc are frequently low. This was on a new planting. Low and deficient in the fall of the year. So we need to go in and look at it. And one of the things that we try to look at when we take a test is that helps us to determine what else do we need to do to really analyze this, to figure out what has been going on, what's the problem. And just as sort of an interesting, Ken will talk about synergism. We use that a lot, synergism and antagonism. We know that calcium and potassium are antagonistic to one another. But we also see where calcium and boron are synergistic. If you put on calcium alone or with calcium nitrate, for example, the levels in the leaf, this happens to be in strawberry, are at a relatively modest level. When we can combine them with boron and with magnesium, they didn't separate magnesium out, so I don't know that factor, but we see it has a higher level. And this is an example of that growing point being short on calcium and boron. You can see the puckering of the leaves. And that's because the plant takes up calcium through the water stream, through the growing tip, or the root tips, I should say. And if it's extremely high humidity, the plant doesn't transpire. And so it doesn't provide that pump effect to bring the calcium along with the water up into the leaves. And I've seen it on raspberries in a greenhouse situation where it was so hot and humid that the tree, or that the plant, couldn't transpire, and therefore it was actually getting that puckering on raspberries, and that's a rarity to see it that bad. But this is a good example and explains a lot about how that calcium boron issue and when nutrients work on apples as well as it relates to bitter pit. And then organic matter, the importance of organic matter and how much water that can hold. And that starts kind of before we're planting, so it's a discussion we'll want to have as far as maybe cover crops and how do you manage that soil prior to even planting the crop. And that is a quick and dirty overview, but then we'll go on to Ken Dart.
Good morning, my name is Ken Dart. I'm the National Technical and Marketing Manager for Agro. And as Chapman mentioned, I've been around tree fruit most of my life. From a small child on up, changed irrigation for my grandparents and uncles, and really developed a love and a passion for the tree fruit industry. And so what I want to talk about today is something that's probably you're tired of hearing about, is quality issues in Honeycrisp, in particular bitter pit internal browning. So, but I want to have this be a very informal discussion. I don't want to sit here and just, regurgitate stuff to you. I want to have some interaction. So please feel free, if you have questions, thoughts, comments, feel free to bring them up. Now, I am from Washington, but I've spent quite a bit of time in Wayne County, New York, in Michigan, so I'm more familiar with a lot of the Midwestern issues with Honeycrisp than you might expect from a person who's based in Washington. And so I'm familiar with some of the differences that really occur between the Pacific Northwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, New York. One of the biggest differences is organic matter. You guys have much higher, in most cases, not every case, there are some sandy soils in Minnesota and Wisconsin, some in Michigan too, but in general, you have higher organic matter in the Midwest and East than we have in the West. Also, the rainfall patterns are different, and that makes big differences, both in terms of the bitter pit and the internal browning. Your winters are more severe. You have a more compressed season than we have in Washington. In Washington, we have the moderating effect of the proximity and the temperature of the ocean right off the coast. Also, the impact of the mountains prevent, in many cases, not every case, but many cases, prevent that cold Canadian air from sinking down and impacting us like it does you folks. So there's some differences there. We have to take those things into account, especially on a picky, temperamental variety like Honeycrisp. We can also talk about Sweet Tango, but primarily most of you have Honeycrisp. We can talk about Sweet Tango as well. So when we're talking about the quality issues related to Honeycrisp, number one, of course, is bitter pit. Number two, and especially this past year, internal browning. Also, color. You're getting rid of the first two, but still maintaining good color. People buy apples with their eyes, right? That's what they do. Housewife goes in, she's buying that apple. Based upon what she sees, she wants color. In bitter pit, we have a lot of risk factors that are really key that you understand when you're growing these apples. So we'll talk about the risk factors, also having an accurate analysis of percentage of loss due to bitter pit. Some people don't really understand how much they're losing because they analyze what's coming out of the pack out, not what's on the tree. In many cases, you have higher levels of actual bitter pit than you may think because all you're analyzing is what's coming out at the back. But you have to analyze how much do I have at harvest? How much is being left on the tree that's bitter pit? How much is being thrown on the ground that's bitter pit? It may be higher than what you expect. If you can measure something, you can manage it. But the key thing, you have to be able to measure these issues and be able to manage them effectively based upon that. Management tools. What things we can do as a manager, as a farmer, to reduce these risk factors and do a better job and improve the packouts and improve the storability of the Honeycrisp and Sweet Tango. What to avoid? When a doctor first gets his license, he takes a Hippocratic oath. What that means is, first, do no harm. In many cases, we unknowingly, unintentionally do things that damage what we're trying to achieve. So first, do no harm. What to avoid? If you can avoid things, there's no cost in that. It's just a matter of understanding. So this is a no-cost way to begin to eliminate some of the problems that we're unintentionally creating in many cases. What to focus on? What do we need to put our attention to minimize the risk factors and the issues that create the bitter pit or internal browning or things that reduce color or reduce storability of the Honeycrisp? And some common misconceptions. There's a lot of mythology out there as it relates to Honeycrisp apples in particular. Internal browning. We'll talk about the causes as far as what is known now. Internal browning is very much a work in progress. University guys don't really give you a whole lot of information. They'll give you some. It's not exactly as dialed in terms of the science as bitter pit is. But we'll talk about impacts of weather, climate, soil, which is why you have it bad some years, not others. Nutritional impacts. Percent color at harvest. The amount, the form, the timing of nitrogen has a huge role in that, tied together with your climate and organic matter in the soil. The timing of your rains. The summertime rains, when you have high organic matter, you can't control it, but it's going to have an impact on your color, as well as your storability and your bitter pit. Plant growth regulators, the PGRs, they have an impact on color as well, or can, either positively or negatively, depending upon which one and how you do it. Potassium in the micros. If you're weak on potassium and some of the micros, you're not going to have the color you want generally. Or at least if you do get it, you're doing it with one arm tied behind your back. When you talk about return bloom and set on Honeycrisp, this is a key deal. It has a major impact on how much bitter pit you're going to have, the flavor of the fruit, the overall quality. So we have to maintain good bearing and avoid alternate bearing and have good set. A good crop load is a key determinant how much bitter pit you're going to have. You guys all know that. The risk factors, number one, crop load. Fruit size, bigger fruit, higher risk. That's why a low fruit load is a big problem. Excess tree vigor, your N applications. Higher organic matter, especially combined with summertime rains, where that nitrogen bleeds off and mineralizes off that organic matter. When the soils are warm, you have a warm rain, up comes nitrogen. There's a good equation too. Stress equals bitter pit. If you stress that tree on a Honeycrisp, you're going to have more bitter pit. Avoid stress during the growing season. The N to CA ratio. Dell did a very good job talking about the ratios. It isn't just a single element, it's the ratio. And when it comes to specifically the Honeycrisp, this is the one that matters the most. Other varieties, the K plus Mg over Ca, very important. And it's still important in Honeycrisp, but the number one ratio in Honeycrisp on bitter pit is N to Ca. That's the one you want to watch. But don't forget the K plus Mg. I'll talk about it again. High organic matter soils, if you have high organic matter soils and you have summertime rains, you're at higher risk. And if you're using the wrong nitrogen fertility, you're making it worse. Summer pruning, am I stressing that tree? Am I causing fast regrowth? Those are things that will add to your bitter pit issues. How much bitter pit do we have on the tree at harvest? Not just in your pack out, but at harvest. How much are you losing in total? It's probably more than you might expect. It's not just the percentage of what's picked and packed, it's what you start out at harvest with. Percent loss also during the 30 days at post-harvest, 30 days in storage, 60 days in storage, 90 days in storage. As the Honeycrisp crop throughout the nation gets bigger, the ability to store that fruit 60, 90 days has become more and more important. There's a lot of lower quality fruit coming out of the lower areas, the southern districts in Washington, where it's hot, which is a bad site, a bad location for Honeycrisp, that doesn't store very well. So they're blowing it out the door. If you can hold your fruit 60, 90 days, those prices are going to tend to come back up in most cases. The ability to store that fruit is a big factor down the road in being profitable with Honeycrisp. Any questions so far? You guys have been easy on me. I thought you guys might pick on the guy from Washington. Our management tools, site selection. What I tell the guys in Washington is, don't grow up where it's hot. Watch really high organic matter soils. Sometimes you don't have a choice, but where you do have a choice, cooler, good air drainage, moderate organic matter, very beneficial. Crop load management, avoiding alternate bearing, setting a good crop every year. Rootstock, Dell touched on this too. You know, a 26 that's too vigorous is a problem. You have too much vigor, you're going to have poor Honeycrisp. Careful nutrition, well thought out, well designed, well planned nutrition program, starting in the soil but combining with the foliar to balance things out. Get the right ratios in that fruit. Pre-harvest fruit analysis. Analyze the fruit. We don't store and sell leaves. We store and sell fruit. So pre-harvest fruit analysis, a very good tool to give you a report card on how you did and a roadmap for the following year. And an accurate analysis at harvest and through storage of what your actual losses due to bitter pit are. What do I minimize? Again, we go back to some of the same principles. Avoid alternate bearing, avoid a low crop load. Your banker hates it too, because if you don't have a good fruit load, your economics that year aren't going to be very good either. But it also ties to your bitter pit. Foliar potassium during cell division. This is one of the ones Dell mentioned, antagonism. Foliar potassium during cell division antagonizes calcium. So things like petal fall 3-18-18, triple 20, potassium phosphite, don't do it. It strongly, strongly antagonizes calcium. That's one of your starting points for bitter pit. A lot of guys go at petal fall triple 20 thinking, well, I got the complete analysis there. I got my N, my P, my K. It's balanced. Problem, that isn't how the tree works. It isn't how the fruit works. I don't care what variety it is, but especially Honeycrisp, having a triple 20 with that much potassium in there during cell division of the fruit will antagonize the calcium and lead you to more bitter pit. Like Del mentioned, potassium goes into the tree, into the fruit very fast. It will always win the race versus calcium to get into that cell wall. We need to have the calcium in that cell wall. When you have calcium in the cell wall, it's like putting Kevlar in a vest. It's firmer, it's stronger, stores better, and you have less bitter pit. But potassium is way more mobile, and you put on triple 20, 31818, potassium phosphate during the cell division, you're going to antagonize the calcium. Cell division starts the minute you have set. So as soon as you have bloom, you're going to have set. And basically, the period from petal fall out for about 30 days, you want to minimize foliar potassium. Soil potassium is different. Soil potassium is pulled up based upon demand, and demand for potassium doesn't take place till later in the season. But foliar potassium, you're ramming it down its throat right at the wrong time. So if you want to use an NPK type product during cell division, you want to use what the plant needs at that time, which is phosphate and a little bit of nitrogen, something like a 9-24-3. What you want is at least a 4-to-1, preferably more than that, 4-to-1 P to K ratio in that foliar NPK product. So instead of a 318-18, 9-24-3. High P, low K. You want the P there, the phosphate there, to drive cell division, drive leaf size, early leaf development, but you don't want the potassium. What is potassium used for? Potassium is used in that tree for cell bulking, not cell division. It's used for color formation. It's used for sugar formation, sugar transport, winter hardiness. Do any of those things take place during cell division? Nobody's volunteering. No. Your demand for potassium does not take place until you have heat in the summertime for stomate function, color formation, sugar transport, heat stress. That's when I want potassium, not during cell division, especially in a foliar applied form. I can't emphasize that enough. The timing, yes, sir.
Tim, is there any
Paul.
value in delaying soil applied potassium until after fruit set?
Not really, as long as you're not overshooting the rate a huge amount. No, there really is no advantage to waiting, because what happens is on soil potassium, the potassium isn't pulled until you have demand, which is basically stomate function in the summertime for the gas exchange, heat stress, drought stress. Bulking of the cells in the fruit requires potassium, color formation, sugar transport. So it'll be pulled after cell division is over. There's a natural regulating force there that leads you to be able to use the potassium in the soil and not cause a problem unless you go way over rate. Because the plant's not going to pull it till it needs it. Doesn't need it till later. It's fine. Good question. So foliar potassium during cell division. Now, the other one I talked about was the N to Ca ratio, especially in Honeycrisp. This is the big one. Excess nitrogen, excess tree vigor, problem. When you have more vigor in the tree, you have more growth. What causes growth? Cell division. When I have a lot of cell division going on, it's forming cells. When I'm forming cells, I'm forming cell walls. What are cell walls composed of? Calcium. I'm creating whole new demand points, new sinks for the calcium beyond the fruit. If I have a lot of tree vigor, I'm competing with the fruit for calcium. If I have excess nitrogen promoting more vigor, what am I doing? Creating a problem. If I have that plus high organic matter in the soil, I got problems. When I want nitrogen, I want it. I only want it during cell division of the fruit and early leaf development. Then I want it tapering off. Late nitrogen is a bad thing for bitter pit, bad for color, bad for storage. You want the N early during cell division, early leaf development, then you want it tapering off. Stress. Stress equals bitter pit, especially in Honeycrisp. So if you could irrigate to manage drought stress, if you're set up for it, very good tool. In Washington, we're 100% irrigation because we couldn't grow a tree without irrigation. It'd be sagebrush. Jackrabbits pack lunch between sagebrush. I mean, it's just nothing there without irrigation. Salts. How many of you use Epsom salts for magnesium deficiency? Nobody volunteering? I imagine a fair amount of you do. It's a cheap form of magnesium. The problem is on Honeycrisp, they're very sensitive to foliar salt applications. Calcium chloride. When you apply chloride or a salt to that tree, you're stressing it, leading to more bitter pit. It also has a bad impact on the lenticels of that fruit, so they won't store as well. In our area, it leads to more sunburn. We have very high sunburn potential. It's high desert climate. But in your case, the big thing to worry about is anytime I'm applying a salt, I'm temporarily stressing that tree. Every time I hit it with a salt, stress. So when I hit it with Epsom salts, calcium chloride, the last thing you want to do in a bitter pit.
If you're going to use Epsom salt, would a spring application, soil application be something that might be beneficial if you're deficient in magnesium?
The question was, if you couldn't hear it, what if I use it in the soil? You know, to cure the magnesium deficiency that you have. The problem with doing it that way is magnesium has an early peak demand. Magnesium is the core component of chlorophyll. So as the leaves come out and they begin expanding, they're forming the chlorophyll molecule. The core component of that is magnesium. You can't get it out of the soil fast enough to support that. So what you want to do is use a low or no salt form of magnesium in the spring as the leaves are ramping up, and like Dell mentioned, post-harvest. That's the best way to do it. If you look at the magnesium DL or things like that are not a salt-based material, you can get the benefit of the mag at the right time, which is exactly what you're going after, without having the salt. Formulation matters. What you really want to zero in on, what I call the 5 R's. Right nutrient, right time, right form, right mix, going to the right place in the plant. So, right nutrient, right time, in the case of magnesium, during rapid leaf development. Right form means avoid the salt, use a dextrose lactose or an amino acid, something that doesn't have the salt load. Going to the right place, the leaves. Great question. Important question. So when we talk about the N to CA ratio in the fruit, anything above 10, watch out. You really like to be below 8. When you want to look at that is in the fruit itself just prior to harvest. Any question to these points at all?
Can it get too low for quality?
You almost, I've never seen it be too low. That takes a huge amount of work to get it. That's a lot more calcium spring than you probably want to do. So I've never seen it too low. But if you're in that 6 to 8 range, in that ratio, N to CA, you're doing well. 6 to 8 is what you want to shoot for. Thanks, Dale. So what do we want to maximize? How do we want to address this as a management issue? First off, we have to start the minute we have cell division on Honeycrisp. Other varieties aren't as particular, but if it's Braeburns or it's Honeycrisp, anything that's really bitter pit prone genetically, you got to start at bloom because that's the start of cell division. So when I have bloom on Honeycrisp, I'm going with foliar calcium right off the bat. You cannot wait till petal fall. You cannot wait to first cover. Making a big mistake if you do. Use the right form. You need a form that will go in the fruit, in the tissues quickly, thoroughly, and completely. And so the dextrose lactose form, the calcium phosphite form, amino acids. What you don't want is unreacted carbonates or oxides because they don't go in there like paint. If it doesn't go in, it doesn't work. It's just paint. So the form of calcium you use is very, very important. Also the right rate. You got to move the needle. You got to move the needle. And so 2 to 4 quarts on apples is where you want to be. In the case of Honeycrisp, you're leaning towards 4 quarts in most of these materials. Yeah.
Like a calcium nitrate, there's a lot of calcium that comes with some nitrogen.
Yes. Question about calcium nitrate. Calcium nitrate has some advantages and some disadvantages. Calcium nitrate is very soluble, it goes in very quickly and thoroughly. The problem is, not more than about 3 or 4 minutes ago, what was I talking about? N to Ca ratio. If I'm applying calcium nitrate like EasyCal or NutriCal, I'm getting calcium in there, but I'm getting some baggage. I'm getting nitrate. What happens to my N to Ca ratio every time I hit it with a calcium nitrate? I'm screwing up my N to Ca ratio. Is that helpful? No. Be aware of the formulation you're using. Calcium nitrate foliarly leads to more bitter pit. It leads to more vigor. It'll make fire blight worse. It'll make fire blight run worse. So calcium nitrate foliarly, I'm not talking about soil now, foliarly, not the right tool. It gives you the calcium, but you get this collateral damage, this collateral baggage from the nitrate.
Calcium chloride, too salty?
Calcium chloride. Too salty. Also, when you apply it early like that, it's pretty hot on those tender leaves. They'll wind up, burning on the leaf margins, and that's stress. It's bitter pit. It also, over time, if you're hitting it again and again with the chloride, by the end of the season, your leaves look pretty thrashed. And so chloride's a very effective form of calcium, but again, the baggage of the chloride, tough. Thank you. Now, foliar calcium can't do it all, but if you use the right form at the right rate, at the right spray interval, in the case of Honeycrisp, it's got to be a tighter spray interval. It can't be a 14 to 21 day type deal. You got to be in there 5 to 7 days as much as possible. Now, I understand there's weather comes in and keeps you from getting in that soon sometimes. But as much as you can on Honeycrisp, especially if you have a light fruit load, especially if you have high organic matter, you're going to want to maintain as much as possible 5 to 7 days. A Gala doesn't need that. A Red doesn't need that. Honeycrisp, Brayburns do. Now, calcium via the soil does not go to the fruit. A lot of people think in Washington we have calcareous soils, high pH calcareous soils, great calcium availability coming out of the soil. Our leaf analysis will show great levels of calcium. Doesn't mean jack. Doesn't mean nothing. It's a false indicator because when calcium comes out of the soil, it only comes up via mass flow, transpiration with the water. Where does that go? Leaves. 90+% of it goes to the leaves, not to the fruit. You cannot rely on the soil to get you where you want to go from a bitter pit on any variety just via the soil. That's not to say it's not important. It's very important. If you supply the tree's needs as much as possible via the soil, great. It's less competitive with the fruit. But to impact the fruit, it has to be a foliar applied calcium in the right form, starting at bloom and running through the year. It's one of these deals. You got to work it from the soil up, foliar down. Soil for the tree, foliar for the fruit. Soil, gypsum or lime, depending upon situation. Want to raise the pH? Lime. If you have mag deficiency, dolomitic lime that has mag in it. If your pHs are good, gypsum is a great tool for calcium to supply that need. Use potassium at the right time, in the right form, in the right place. Do not ignore potassium. For years, most of us on Honeycrisp had a real paranoia about potassium, and rightfully so. But we've overdone it. What we find is we can use potassium foliarly if we put it on at the right time, in the right form, and we do a good job with calcium beforehand. So do a great job with calcium during cell division, maintain the calcium, and then we can put foliar potassium on during color formation, sugar transport, heat, drought stress. When we do that, we wind up with better color, and less internal browning.
What size of the apple would you use it potassium?
Judge it by color. Color break. So when you start to see color, that's your visual cue. That's your indicator. Once you have color break, it's time to use potassium, but not any sooner than that. You can also use the calendar. I hate using calendars for any kind of spraying, but if you're 30 days past petal fall, that's the earliest you want to come in with foliar potassium.
Could you comment on the effect of lime on soil pH as far as like a ratio? Would 100 pounds per acre of lime move your pH, half a point, a whole point? Is there a ratio that you can equate to that?
I wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, that really depends upon more factors. It's not just a one-to-one type deal. I can't give you that ratio without looking at a complete soil test. A lot will depend upon organic matter, other things that are going on. You'd be better off going to somebody locally and have a soil test to go with it. Del, comments on that?
The CEC of the soil makes a huge difference. So if you have a high clay soil, you're going to need a lot more calcium.
Yep. That's why you want the soil test. So use the right potassium at the right time, in the right form, at the right place. Do not use potassium nitrate. Some guys use potassium nitrate because it's cheap and it greens up the tree. If I use potassium nitrate, what happens to my N to Ca ratio? What happens to my color? Goes to crap. So don't do that. Apogee. Many of you guys use Apogee? Great tool. It helps reduce your pruning, helps reduce too much vigor, helps reduce fire blight run. Great plant growth regulator, good tool. For years it was thought you can't put calcium with it. And when are we applying Apogee? We're putting it on during cell division. We're putting it on right during peak demand for calcium. What a shame not to be able to use that ride for calcium, right? Well, we've done a lot of work with WSU, University of Massachusetts, University of Idaho, looking specifically at calcium phosphite, System Cal, System C-Cal, mixed with Apogee, and we can do it with Apogee and not deactivate the Apogee, but only the phosphite form. We have some data over here on the side, some brochures, or some data printouts from those trials showing that we can use calcium phosphite with the Apogee and not lose the value of the Apogee and be applying calcium with that ride during peak demand for calcium. Any ride you can use with calcium during that cell division window, take it, but be smart about it. Balanced tree growth. Avoid too much vigor. Excess vigor is a bad deal. Summer pruning, other than just the light little tips, it's going to cause regrowth, it's going to cause stress, you're going to have more bitter pit. People who hedge in the summertime on Honeycrisp, pretty dicey. Do pre-harvest fruit analysis to give you a report card. For years, we talked about doing a golf ball sized and pre-harvest. I've been doing fruit analysis for 15, 18 years now. And when it boils down to it, I no longer use the golf ball size terminal test. I use the pre-harvest test. The pre-harvest test will tell you a couple things. It'll give you those ratios that are so important that Del showed you. But also, it gives you a report card how you did. It'll also give you an indication of how well that fruit will store, or if you have to blow it out the door. It's a good risk management tool to go along with your regular harvest management measurements. Will that fruit store 90 days, or will it be blown out the door? It also gives you a roadmap for the following year. What do I have to do the following year to improve upon that measurement that I got from that fruit analysis?
Is there a point where you could do it during the season and still have an effect later in the season? I mean, was there a point, when does the point come where you say it isn't going to make any difference what you do now?
That's why I dropped the early fruit analysis. The question was, is there a point in time when I can take a fruit analysis earlier in the year and have actionable information to do something to change what's going to happen? The problem you have is the only time you get calcium into the cell wall is during cell division, and that's a 30-day window. By the time you get 30 millimeter fruit, that window is just about closed. So really, there's nothing you can do with that I've seen that's usable with that early test. The pre-harvest one, 7 to 10 days pre-harvest, closer to harvest the better. That one is actionable for the following year. That tells you, well, I didn't do a good enough job on calcium, or I had too much nitrogen, or I had potassium at the wrong time, or too much potassium. That's the one also that can tell you, well, this fruit's not going to store very well because my N to CA ratio is wrong, or my K plus Mg is wrong. I'm going to have more bitter pit showing up in storage. That's the one, if you're going to do a test, that's the one I would spend the money on. That's your money test, is the one pre-harvest, fruit analysis. Yes?
You aren't saying that after 30 days, the calcium doesn't do much good?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, what I'm saying is you can't get any more in the fruit when cell division is over, and that's about a 30-day window. But you still have to maintain it because all the fruit is a storage vessel. As you have ongoing growth in that tree, ongoing cell division, that's a sink for calcium. If you don't support that tree's needs, guess where it's going to get some of the calcium?
So just to be clear here, you still would suggest foliar calcium?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's the cell division window, which is when you maximize the calcium going into the cell. Then there's what I call the maintenance window, which is after that you have to maintain it, otherwise you lose what you've achieved during cell division. So there's cell division window, maintenance window. Yes?
Let's go back to potassium. You used to use KDL on strawberries, and if I thought we were going to get a frost. 4 years ago, we had the same kind of frost that killed all the apple flowers from, say, 6 feet down, and everything above was fine. Is there a use for KDL on a tree at that point?
You hit a key issue. I'm very glad you brought that up. My use of KDL during that time is strictly for frost protection. But I don't use it as insurance. That's not how you want to. The only time you want to use KDL is if during cell division, is if I have to. If I don't have to use it, I don't want to use it just for insurance. But if I have a high quality, high confidence forecast of a frost, I'll go in there ahead of that event with 4 quarts of either potassium finishing solution or KDL, and that can buy me 4 or 5 degrees of protection for 2.5 days. If it's a matter of saving the crop, I will do it. Otherwise, I will not do it because the impact on antagonizing calcium on apples is not worth doing it. But if I have a high quality forecast saying I'm going to have a frost event, I'll pull the trigger. Otherwise, I won't. If that 4 or 5 degrees will buy you enough temperature for a couple of days, that's where you're at. Common misconceptions. Calcium is calcium. No, it's not. Formulation will dictate how well it goes in. It'll dictate what baggage it has with it. If it's calcium nitrate, foliar, I'm getting that nitrate screwing up my N to CA ratio. If it's chloride, I'm getting salt. I'm stressing that tree, thrashing my leaves. If it's calcium oxide, it's not soluble. It's like paint. Unreacted calcium carbonate, same way. It's paint. Doesn't go in. So formulation of the calcium matters. Another misperception. Oh, I don't need calcium until petal fall. No. On Honeycrisp, Brady Burns, anything that's prone to bitter pit or that you want to store, start at bloom. If a guy waits till first colony moth cover, for instance, cell division is mostly over by then. Apogee has to go on without calcium. 90% true, but you can put it on with calcium phosphite. System cal, system C-cal will go with apogee. We have the data, replicated trial data from University of Massachusetts, Dwayne Green, Don Elving at WSU, and S.E. Falahi, University of Idaho. Multiple years, it's over there if you want it. So we can use that ride with the apogee and get calcium at the same time. Must totally avoid potassium. I was in this school 4 years ago, 5 years ago. You can use potassium foliarly if we wait to the right time, use the right form, and do a good job with calcium during cell division and maintain it. If we do a good job with potassium, we'll have better color, less browning, better storage, better balance, and the trees will be a little bit hardier going into the winter.
So later on, you can use system cal and potassium at the same time,
Once cell division is over, then I can bring in the potassium.
but still compete with some cal, system cal.
Well, you mentioned system cal. And system cal, let me back up a step. Phosphites are a great tool, but like most tools, there's a double-edged sword going on. The phosphite forms, the system cereal, all system products are phosphites, right? Okay. Phosphites create a root flush, which in the spring is a very good thing. In the summertime, especially if you have any kind of organic matter or any kind of nitrogen floating around in the soil solution, and I put on something that stimulates root activity, root uptake, and bringing things up, I stop with any phosphites unless I have a really good reason. I stop with the phosphites if I don't have a really good reason at color break. And use the Vigor Cal, less expensive. I don't have that N coming up from that phosphite root flush. So System Cal, System C Cal, very good tools, but unless I have a really good reason, I stop using them at color break.
What would be some of the reasons you would use a disease?
Severe disease issues. Other than that, I would not be using a phosphite past color break. Any kind of phosphite, potassium phosphite, calcium phosphite, zinc phosphite, stop at color break. N is N. No, it's not. The form of N you use is crucial, both foliarly and soil. In the soil, what you want to have happen is when I want N, I want it. When I don't want it, I don't want it. I want N for cell division, for my fruit size, early fruit growth, early leaf development, then I want it tapering off. Calcium nitrate in the soil, not foliar, but in the soil, calcium nitrate is a great tool because it's quick, it's fast. I'm also supplying calcium. I'm not dropping my pH. We don't sell it, but calcium nitrate in the soil can be a good tool. The soil-applied urea forms tend to last longer. And if I have high organic matter soil kicking in late anyway, that can be a compounding factor on my N to Ca ratio, not where I want to go. Be very careful of the form, the rate, and the timing of your soil-applied nitrogen.
Ken, so an ammoniated nitrogen for early growth, the appropriate ammonium sulfate?
If you don't have a pH issue, it can be fine. Be aware that it will drop your pHs. If you're starting with a low pH, ammonium sulfate is just going to take it down further. Nor does it have any calcium in it. So just bear those things in mind.
Do you ever factor in a large electrical storm with nitrogen?
The question was, do you factor in large electrical storms with nitrogen? They release a lot of N, but it's not controllable. And it will impact depending upon the degree of it and what your starting point is. If you have a high organic matter situation and you have a summertime storm, it's rain in that warm soil, it's mineralizing the organic matter, plus you're getting the N from the electrical storm, watch your calcium very strongly. Tighten your intervals, hit the calcium hard to help compensate for that. Those storms tend to take place when? Summer. Which is when your soils are warm. If you have inorganic matter in there, it wants to come out with that rain. It'll mineralize, release that N. Plus you have the N in the atmosphere from the electrical storm. It's a double whammy. Depends upon the severity and how widespread it is. But it's not a positive thing from a Honeycrisp standpoint. Other varieties, not really a big deal. But Honeycrisp, Brave burns things that are prone to bitter pit in the first place. All it does is add more complication. Internal browning, nutrition, organic matter, climate, especially late season rain and high organic matter. These, again, internal browning is a work in progress. Universities spending a lot of time on this, still learning about it. But what appears to be deficiency of potassium. But this doesn't mean go out there willy-nilly with potassium. Use soil potassium at appropriate levels and foliar potassium in the summertime after cell division's over in the right form after you've done a good job with the calcium. If you're too low on phosphate, if you're low on phosphate during the cell division of the fruit, you don't get good cell organization in the fruit, that becomes a problem. How many of you guys have sliced fruit? If you want good sliced fruit, phosphate like 924-3 applied during cell division really helps on the white flesh color on sliced fruit. High organic matter soils, summertime rains, electrical storms combined with that, more problems. If you're weak on the micros, especially zinc, magnesium, copper, manganese in certain situations, can be an issue, a risk factor. You want to talk more about browning at all? Go ahead and we can certainly delve into it. Return bloom and bloom set. Honeycrisp, this is the deal. You don't want over thin, but you need to thin to have return bloom. Do it very carefully, very carefully. Also, in a light crop year, you want to set as much as you can. We'll talk about boron and moly, molybdenum, very key deals. Also, if you're overly vegetative, if you have too much N, tree doesn't want to set. Watch the N from a set standpoint as well. Plant growth regulators have an impact on that, and post-harvest nutrition has a big impact. So we want to balance nitrogen. We want to have the right rate, right form, right timing of N. Don't overshoot because it'll stay vegetative. It won't set. You won't have as much return bloom. Boron for pollen tube growth. Also, as Del mentioned, boron synergizes calcium. Boron during a cell division synergizes calcium, makes it work better. It'll improve your bitter pit situation. If you look at a wall, a brick wall, look at a brick wall, you see the bricks and you see the mortar. The bricks are calcium, the mortar is the boron. So in terms of an apple, boron during cell division, foliarly in the right form, critical. Now, boron comes in a variety of forms. The oldest one, the cheapest one, is Solubor. What is Solubor? Sodium borate. Sodium. What does salt do to my pollen? Desiccates it, dries it out. Also, it's a salt. So don't use Solubor, use a boric acid form. The form of boron you use, very important. Molybdenum, moly. Moly encourages a tree to produce more pollen. Pollination is a numbers game. If I'm in danger of not having enough set, if I can encourage more pollen production, it's going to help me get more set. It also makes the blooms more receptive to the pollen for better set. It's one of the secret sauces a little bit. It's one of the things people don't know about that's very, very important for set. Molybdenum. Phosphate. The ADP, ATP, adenosine diphosphate, adenosine triphosphate, those are energy. When we put on phosphate during cell division, during set, it provides energy to the tree to hold that set, not to drop it. It also improves my flesh quality inside that fruit, but it has to be during cell division. Seaweed products, naturally derived cytokinins, auxins, very, very beneficial for helping to reduce stress and improve set. Simspray 20X. We also have System C-Cal, which is calcium phosphate with the seaweed in it, the Simspray in it. Vigor C-Cal has Simspray in it. We have some very good tools for that. Careful thinning. Post-harvest nutrition, especially the P and the K, boron and moly, very helpful. Color at harvest, the rate, form, amount of nitrogen. If I have late N coming up in organic matter, or because I put too much N on in the wrong form, it's lasting too long into the year, it's going to have a negative impact on my color. Fighting a cold, excuse me. High organic matter, summertime rains, you can't control it, but what you can do is balance it with calcium. Phosphites, we talked about this a minute ago. If I have color break and I start using phosphites, if I have nitrogen in the soil solution, the phosphite root flush is going to bring that up. In the spring, it's fine, but after color break, I don't want to use phosphites unless I have a really good reason. Plant growth regulators. Retain, if not used properly. Oh, go ahead.
What's the difference between phosphate and phosphite?
Very good question. Phosphate chemically is PO4, P2O5. Phosphites are PO3. They're cousins, but they do entirely different things. For 99% of the crops we grow, phosphites cannot be used as a phosphorus phosphate source. The exceptions are avocados and citrus, which you guys don't grow. So phosphites are not a good nutrient source for phosphate. Phosphate causes cell division and provides energy. So during cell division of the fruit, cell division of the leaves, energy early in the season, phosphate fits that. Phosphite is a systemic, by which I mean it goes through the xylem, which is the canopy, throughout the canopy, and then goes down the phloem to the roots, which is why, if you remember Alliette, it is a aluminum phosphate, was the very first one out 20 some odd years ago. You could apply that for root rot, for Phytophthora, apply it foliarly, you get very good control of root rot in the soil. It goes up and down. Only phosphites as a nutrient class are phloem transportable. If I want to have zinc and manganese going down the phloem to the root zone, zinc manganese phosphite is the way to do it. Or if I just want zinc down there, system zinc. Roots have a high requirement for zinc. Zinc phosphite becomes a very good tool because it gets it there. Plus you have the phosphite helping you on disease. The root flush, which early on is good, not late, but early on it's good. So those are kind of the differences. Phosphate is not as systemic as a phosphite. It doesn't have disease capabilities, but it does have the food and the energy capability that phosphites don't. Yeah.
When you have few or no seeds in your fruit, is that phosphorus or phosphate that's missing? There's people saying, I don't have as many seeds in my apples as I used to.
Fighting bad cold. The seed situation. Let's talk about first the importance of it. If you don't have good seeds, you're not going to have good calcium levels. Seeds have a big interaction in terms of calcium level in the fruit. A full seed complement is hugely beneficial for fruit quality, calcium, shape of the fruit. Seed complement is dictated by pollination at the start, phosphate, calcium levels. Seaweed levels can impact that. So the seed complement is determined somewhat the year before, but especially that spring. If you don't have good bee weather for good bee activity, or if you have frost at the wrong time, those are things that can impact and lack of phosphate. So that's why you want to do a good post-harvest program. When you go on vacation, the night before, what do? You gas the tank up, right? Most people go on vacation the next morning, they'll gas the tank up the night before. Apples are the same way. If you put them to bed with a full tank of gas, with a good foliar program to store things in the buds, when things take off in the spring, it's ready to go. Key deal. And part of the benefit of that is making sure you have better pollination. Better set, better return bloom.
Where does manganese fit into the seed quality?
It depends upon your pH. If your pH is below about 6.5, 6.4, manganese availability generally is pretty good. if you're where I come from, it has high pHs, 7.1, 7.2 and higher, manganese availability is in the toilet. And so manganese becomes very important because manganese, along with copper, zinc, plays key roles in some of the enzyme production, hormone production in the shoot tips and root tips that impact what's going to happen for pollination and for seed development. But again, you have to have it there early. And so manganese, zinc, magnesium, copper, we want those stored in those tissues ready to go for the following spring.
So it almost sounds as if you advocate using zinc, copper, and some of those micronutrients in the fall of the year before your application, maybe after harvest?
Yes, yes. The question was, am I advocating the use of zinc and copper and magnesium foliar after harvest? And the answer is definitely yes, as long as the leaves are in good condition. If the leaves are thrashed, you're not going to get much uptake. So the timing, or the leaves are in good condition, that's when you have to get it.
Will they take it through their bark at that time?
Bark uptake is not very good. Green tissues, the leaves and the buds themselves, that's what has the best uptake. So if you wait too long and the leaves are yellowed, thrashed, you're wasting it, really.
Can you put it on when the window of crop is still there?
Can you put it on when the crop is still there? With the right forms, to a certain degree, the answer is yes. But ideally, you do it right after harvest. But it's a qualified yes.
Well, with Honeycrisps, you pick the last picking. The leaves are shot generally by then, so you have to kind of do it ahead of time, don't you? Or
As much as you can.
Yeah.
Now, in the West, if we're timely, if we're doing the right things, we don't go much into a third or fourth pick. We do it in 2 picks generally, if we're doing it right. 2 picks and foliar. And at that stage, the leaves are still in good shape in the West. I've seen the same thing in New York and Michigan. We still have decent leaf condition. 3rd pick, you're on the edge. Is that?
yeah.
And at that stage, the leaves are still in good shape in the West. I've seen the same thing in New York and Michigan. We still have decent leaf condition. 3rd pick, you're on the edge. Is that?
Yeah.
But post-harvest, while leaves are in good condition, is the best. But there are certain select things we can do prior to that that can be beneficial, but we take that case by case. Thanks. So color at harvest, the rate form of N, summertime rains, phosphites mid to late season. You're going to pull up the N, bad for color. Plant growth regulators, use of seaweeds late can delay color formation.